Hello, let me introduce you into small, lightweight, modular framework based on Spring and proposed for Spring enterprise applications. We call it Banshun. So we look into a typical problem of building enterprise applications. Then we compare Banshun with what we usually use for such applications. Then we look how, how to approach Banshun for enterprise application and look through features which a lot of, but we'll look through them quite fast. Okay, here's our enterprise application. They just provide certain services for some users and use some storage, but we don't care much about external environment, and now we are going to talk about only the services, how to build huge applications with many of them. So we used to do something like this, establish the certain singleton in Spring and export it as a backend web service with Haitian REST or whatever. So everything is goes nice, right? Until we run a huge enough application with many of such services. We used to pack such application in some certain application archive and run on certain container like this. But there is a problem, right? The bigger the application, the more some dependencies between services we have, and it might end with a big problem when we lose the control between these dependencies and application stability. So software engineering quite mature already, and we all know the solution for this, right? It's just introducing structure inside of the application, introduce some certain components with stable contract between them, and give a freedom for component vendor to change the implementation, but establishing just keeping the later contracts between components. And here are the options. So we can run such components remotely and let them communicate with the network. I'd say that lately we used to know it as a SOA, and now there is a new hype which is associated with microservices, and that's what not Banshun is built for. So Banshun is built for solid deployment when communicates when components are collocated and communicates in the same process pro, process space. Okay, and for doing this, we just pack them all together into application archive. Recently I found the blog post, which is 4 years old already, and it refers to such approach as a cookie cutter deployment, which I really like how it sounds. When we start to build huge enough backend applications, we found that Spring framework is not more modular or out of the box. We tried to approach import instruction, but we found that import instruction works like preprocessor or directive in C, which is called include works. So it just merge all application context altogether in single application context instance So it merged many XMLs into single component descriptor application context. But and here are problems with it because if some certain component is under control of another team, you never know what arrives in new version of this application context. So it might be a bean which is named exactly like one of your singletons. Might be some scope settings or lazy initialization settings or of any bean post processor, well, whatever. And there's a problem with the partial run of such application, and we've looked into this problem lately. Then we come to the trivial idea that our framework should allow to build some components separately, but easily run them all together and has a big level of flexibility in this. Okay, the first part is over. Let's compare Banshun with common technologies. Here's a scary picture about class loader hierarchy from the JBoss documentation, which I actually really like. I like to work on JBoss in the first years of my career. So what we found that even huge enterprise application can run with a single class loader. So, but OSGI and AGB pays a lot of attention to control multiple class loaders, right? Which is pretty challenging, right? And requires a lot of resource and developers attitude. Okay, think about the simple fact that OSGI and EGB was invented before we had Maven, and we didn't have the facilities to control component versions and resolve versions conflict, and it might have happened that this is only a reason why these technologies try to resolve these versions in runtime. So once we have a Maven, right, even huge applications can run with single versions of the certain component across the whole platform. Like this. So we think that single class loader is enough for even for huge application, and Maven is a tool for resolving version conflicts. One interesting feature of OSGI and EGB is partial redeploy of the running application. We advise don't ever use this, especially in production, because it's no easy way to prove that it really works. That application where you redeploy the one component can continue to work, and just that is, we don't care much about this possibility. I spent a lot of time for tuning such component descriptors to put correct versions and declare necessary dependencies. The most odd situation is when we use use OSGI and we generate runtime component descriptor in the build time with bundler plugins. It's pretty strange for me if we're doing something in the build time. Why do we do something like this in the runtime after that, so we can do everything in build time? Banshun doesn't need any building facility, and requires only few tiny artifacts, which is least as possible. I was wondering that OSGI and HGB implementation provides pretty inconvenient runtime facilities, and Banshun is much better here. Okay, that's what's said in this slide. Okay, and of course Google know what's wrong and what's not wrong, what's right. So let's look how to incorporate Banshun into your application. The idea is fairly trivial. In the root application context, we just declare our children context, like at the picture. Then we can export any singletons or services from any of these children context and import them. So it's implement just registry pattern, and that is Banshun runtime build these components all together, resolves dependency, and run these children context one by one in the correct sequence. That is. And let's briefly look into the features. Let's imagine we have such simple enterprise application. Here you can see the black rectangles of the separate components, and every components have certain services. And here are dependencies between these services. One service call another, like this. At first, Banshun reduce the services dependencies to the component dependencies, and now we know which context depends from which. That allow us to run the components into proper sequence, right? Like this in this animation. But before running these application context one by one, we can run easily dependency check and verify the trivial requirements. So for example, like wrong import export declaration, and just we can verify wrong dependencies before we start the application. For example, what I see in Hotjar implementation, when you put the wrong descriptors to the bundles and try to run the application, it just takes some time to resolve the dependencies. It just used timeout to for trying to launch the application, which has no chance to run, right? At contrast to this, Banshun can easily recognize that the application descriptor is wrong and save you time for early reporting this mistake right into the log file. Of course, we can create a cycle between our components, and by default Banshun prohibit them, but you have certain level of flexibility about handling dependency cycles if you wish. There is a big problem that when one of the components cannot be initialized, it creates like chain of failures, which is quite long. It's quite inconvenient to reach the root cause of the failure. Here, Banshun save your time and print the root cause for problem analysis. By default, if one of component components fail to initialize, Banshun stop right there and let you deal with the problem. But you can enable fault tolerance mode, which first doesn't stop the application launch when one of the components fail, but it also saves your time by omitting the dependent components from attempts to run, something like this, which is quite convenient. Convenient because sometimes you need to run the huge applications from many modules on the certain environment where some of components cannot be run at all, but you need to pass some certain tests with this certain environment, which is just partially functional. Here, Banshun can't help you without any application modification. You can run the huge application in fault tolerance mode and pass some partial test suite with only with several components alive. And there are a few features for production. We can face the unevenly load on our services. For example, when one service is loaded much more than another, and in this case, we wish to launch launch these highly demanded services on certain boxes, and doesn't and don't we wish to launch launch it on another boxes. Here Banshun can help you. It will just launch any modules which you merge into the application archive during build time. It might seem like Spring profiles, but it works through the build time facilities, right? You can profile your application in the Maven descriptor and define which modules come into which WAR file. And here's the same feature. It can be achieved with the runtime settings, but it's a little bit better than Spring profiles because we can declare which services we need to run on this certain environment, and then Banshun build the graph of dependent components which is necessary for these services. It's much flexible, and also it will check that all dependent components which is necessary for the certain services run at this environment and omit to launch dependent components of services which you don't care at this environment, like this. Here is our application, which is already successfully emerged, run, and gets profit for about 5 years or so. So it has just plenty of modules, and modules continue to come in and so on. Banshun is built on Spring OOP, so these sources which you import and export between contexts can be used as points for injecting interceptors and aspects. Here's a list of references and authors to blog and the grid dynamics repository. So you are welcome. come and ask your questions. Try Banshun and leave us your feedback. Thank you very much for watching.